China is bracing for another COVID-19 wave. That's after health workers recently discovered 120 new subvariants. While the West has mostly begun to move on from the pandemic, China could be hunkering back down. This comes as Beijing scraps production of its domestic vaccines due to low efficacy rates. What does the looming wave mean for the world? What do you think? Let us know below and subscribe if you haven't already. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. 120 subvariants of COVID-19 discovered in China in recent months. This, according to Chinese authorities. Now, an expert says the country's next COVID-19 wave is around the corner.
My channel hasn't been updated for more than 10 days because my whole family has been infected with the flu. Some people say this is not flu, but the second wave of the pandemic. Who knows if it's flu or COVID-19?
According to China's Center for Disease Control and Prevention, 4 new subvariants of the COVID-19 virus were discovered last week. And since the country's reopening at the end of last year, 120 subvariants have been found within its borders. That knowledge triggering more concerns about the infection's mutations. On top of that, the production of the first Chinese-made drug to treat COVID-19 has been suspended due to the drug's poor efficacy. With the virus re-emerging in quite a few Chinese provinces, the director of China's National Center for Infectious Disease recently predicted that COVID-19 will spread far faster than the flu in China, and that the next wave of the pandemic will hit the country in May and June this year.
China also plans to restart its COVID-19 testing with some changes. This time, it's not about mass testing all residents in a given city. Instead, health workers will perform random and spot checks at medical facilities in the country. Officials say their goal is to track incomplete and underreported COVID-19 data. That's amid the country's history of severely underreporting its health numbers. House Republicans are investigating the Biden administration for an alleged abuse of power. They say the White House suppressed information about COVID-19. Meanwhile, House Democrats say it's actually their GOP counterparts who are weaponizing the government. Let's dive in.
Did the government pressure social media to censor Americans for saying things like natural immunity is real?
Absolutely.
Did the government pressure social media to censor Americans for saying things like gain-of-function research happened in that lab in China?
Absolutely.
The House Committee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government is probing a lawsuit by Louisiana and Missouri. The suit from May 2022 says the Biden administration colluded with social media giants Meta, Twitter, and YouTube to censor free speech in the name of combating so-called disinformation and misinformation. Missouri's former Attorney General Eric Schmidt was another witness. In his opening statement, he said Dr. Anthony Fauci knew that the Wuhan lab in China was conducting gain-of-function research.
But he sought to discredit and suppress the theory that COVID-19 leaked from a lab to deflect blame and avoid potential responsibility for the pandemic.
He and Louisiana's Attorney General left after their opening remarks. Some Democrats heavily criticized that because they couldn't examine the two.
They're
not here to
understand that. You will be able to
they
ask.
have scurried away with your complicity. They refused to defend.
Scurried away. They
in
were
a country of
like
330 million people, you couldn't find 2 people
for his
to defend
5 minutes
their
of
statements.
testimony.
That's pretty disgraceful.
Mr. Sauer,
if
you
allowing them
recognize.
to leave is not weaponization, I don't know what is, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, right.
However, Jordan later pointed out that the witnesses aren't required to stay. Also that Republicans similarly weren't able to examine witnesses at the January 6 hearings. Reporting by Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Chinese telecom giant Huawei is facing rough waters. The tech corporation just released its profit report for 2022, and it reflects the sharpest drop since 2011. Huawei says its net profit for the year hit slightly over $5 billion, signaling a near 70% drop from 2021. An effort to explain the dive, company leadership cited issues like rising commodity prices, last year's pandemic restrictions, and a one-off gain last year that boosted the 2021 total. That's related to the company's sale of smart device brand Honor. But other issues may be playing a bigger role. For years, the U.S. has been working to cut off Beijing's access to cutting-edge technology. That's for fear it could be used to advance Chinese military development. Washington successfully blocked Huawei's access to key American tech in 2019 through 2020, including Google's Android operating system, the parts it needs to run, like certain microchips. The move crippled the tech giant's smartphone business, sending it plummeting from its status as the world's #1. Without the Android system, the company has faced difficulty selling its smartphones and smartwatches outside China. Huawei devices now use the Harmony OS operating system. It reportedly functions on over 330 million tech gadgets as of late 2022, but hasn't caught on to popularity outside China. What's more, Washington has been urging nations worldwide to exclude Huawei gear as they build 5G network infrastructure. That's over espionage concerns, with many accusing the company of feeding info to Beijing's Communist Party. Some have joined the effort, like the UK, while others are still weighing it, like Germany. Despite all that, CFO Meng Wanzhou touted 2022 at a recent news conference, calling it the year the company pulled itself out of crisis mode and returned to business as normal. She and other executives said they fought their way out of what they called a fatal impasse, referencing the U.S. pressure. The year saw Huawei diversify into new areas, like cloud computing and the electric car market. A new rule from Chinese securities officials taking effect on Friday. From now on, Chinese companies that want to list overseas must first get the green light from authorities. Here's more.
The regulator for China's securities industry would vet the company's applications. It's called the China Securities Regulatory Commission. 7 Chinese companies listed in the U.S. in March before the deadline. That's compared with just 4 in the previous month. Chinese authorities say the new rule reflects China's commitment to opening its capital markets. The new rule seeks to clarify the country's previously obscure regulations. Historically, China hasn't enforced clear regulatory rules for overseas listings. In 2021, it clamped down on rideshare giant Didi after it went public and raised over $4 billion in the U.S. The move left many dumbfounded. Beijing also put pressure on companies looking to list overseas after Didi's incident.
The head of China's security regulator meeting with bigwigs from Wall Street and Beijing Friday. That's including senior executives from Goldman Sachs, HSBC, and Bridgewater. The regulator, called the China Securities Regulatory Commission, said international financial institutions and investors are welcome to expand in China. The trip marks the top financial executive's first China visit since the pandemic. That's as global financial giants seek to bolster relations with Beijing. Wall Street and European firms have stepped up expansion in China in recent years. That's by establishing new setups and joint ventures. A blow to China's chipmaking industry. Another country is signing on to U.S. export restrictions targeting semiconductor making equipment. Here are the details.
A US-led charge to make it harder for China to make advanced chips scored a big win on Friday. That's as Japan became the latest country to align itself with US technology trade controls. It announced it would restrict exports of 23 types of semiconductor manufacturing equipment. Japan said equipment makers would need to look for export permission for all regions, though it did not specify China as the target of the measures. Japanese Economy and Trade Minister Yasutoshi Nishimura said Japan wants to stop advanced tech being used for military purposes. The decision is seen as a major win for the US President Joe Biden's administration. In October, it announced restrictions on China's access to US chip-making tech to slow its military and technological advances. Fellow chip technology heavyweight the Netherlands said earlier this month that it too would join the US in restricting exports. Japan's restrictions will be effective from July and cover 6 categories of equipment used in chip making. The country is a key producer of chip-related tech made by companies like Tokyo Electron and Nikon.
Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen left New York on Friday, headed for Central America. She departed the States with an award in hand, received the day before from the renowned think tank Hudson Institute. Hudson President and CEO John Walters made a statement at the Institute's evening event, saying Tsai has led a vibrant democracy with great courage and clear-eyed determination. That's to resist tyranny and maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific. Hudson's Global Leadership Award is presented to international leaders who make outstanding contributions to the world and demonstrate extraordinary moral courage. Tsai will stop in California on her way back from Central America to Taiwan. There, she's expected to meet with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Another battleground for China and Taiwan. On Friday, China's foreign ministry stated its opposition to Taiwan joining the CPTPP. It's an international free trade agreement based around the Pacific Rim.
Britain, on the other hand, agreed to join the trade pact the same day, seeking to build ties around the world after leaving the European Union. Entering the trade pact requires unanimous consent from all current members. In 2021, both China and Taiwan applied to join. For Taiwan to get in, the island must be accepted first in order to prevent China from voting it out. For decades, China has seen Taiwan as its own territory. Though the Communist Party has never ruled the island, the Chinese regime has a history of opposing the possibility of Taiwan forming its own diplomatic ties with the West. But that hasn't stopped Taiwan from seeking alliances. Last Monday, Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen called on Britain for support, asking the nation to back its bid to join. The long-term benefits of the trade pact mean little for the UK, but leaders are aiming to boost geopolitical strategy. Britain sees China as what is called an epic-defining challenge. The nation has also teamed up with other countries, both to counter China and protect maritime security in the Indo-Pacific.
Around 70 military drills. That's how many exercises U.S. forces have conducted this month around the world. The latest is a joint drill with the Philippines in Southeast Asia. The live fire activity kicked off on Friday at the Philippines' largest military base. It's part of annual joint exercises between the two countries. This year, over 3,000 soldiers took part, highlighting improved ties between the two militaries. The drills come on the heels of another development, the Philippines granting Washington access to more of its military bases. The move angered Beijing, as the Philippines is seen as a key partner in the geopolitical rivalry between the U.S. and China. Washington's alliance in the Indo-Pacific is keeping Beijing on edge. China now trying to win over its neighbors and get them away from Washington. The communist regime is now poised to sign an agreement to join the Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty. Here's more.
The treaty, also known as the Bangkok Treaty, is aimed to keep nuclear weapons out of Southeast Asia. Under it, 10 Southeast Asian states would renounce the right to nuclear weapons in any form in the region. If signed, it would make China the first nuclear weapon state to adhere, setting it apart from France, Russia, Britain, and the United States. In a meeting with the treaty's head on Monday, Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang made the commitment to join. As far back as 2021, Chinese leader Xi Jinping has signaled urgency for entering the agreement. Analysts see the move as a way for Beijing to embellish its image and divert attention away from its rapid nuclear expansion. Another factor at play, just a few months earlier that same year, the U.S. forged an alliance with Australia and the UK, known as AUKUS. The partnership allows for the sharing of advanced defense technologies to counter China. Again, Beijing's latest commitment follows closely on the heels of a new AUKUS announcement. It confirms Australia's purchases of U.S. nuclear-powered submarines. Experts warn that China could use the Bangkok Treaty to sow discord between the U.S. and the agreement's southeastern member countries.
Australia remains one of Washington's top allies in the Indo-Pacific region. So how should the nation handle its Pacific Island neighbors, especially when they hold strategic importance? We spoke to Kevin Andrews, former Australian Minister for Defense and a contributor with the Epoch Times, for his take on this, plus how to deal with China in trade.
The Foreign Minister, for example, and the Trade Minister, the Defence Minister of Australia visit these these island nations, on a regular basis, not just to see visits to Europe or the United States or elsewhere, the big powers as being important, but also to be visiting on a very regular basis to these countries. And I think we also should be doing things like sending, our naval vessels through those countries. They're there when a natural disaster occurs and we're providing help. But I think just to be seen in a port in many of these nations from time to time on a fairly regular or frequent rotation, I think is important. It sends a message to say that Australia is part of this region and we care for what happens in your country.
And zooming in on Australia specifically, it seems in the past years with the pandemic, Australia-China relations have been really in the spotlight, especially in terms of trade. Going forward, how do you see those relations continuing? Is it getting better? Is it getting worse?
Well, China is a major trading partner for Australia. It's a major destination for many of our resources, for iron ore, for coal in particular, and that's going to continue in the future. It's going to be important. China needs energy. China needs raw materials in order to maintain and indeed restart its economy, having suffered under the COVID restrictions and the like. So that relationship is important, but it's not a no limits relationship. It's a relationship in which we say there are certain things which we stand for and that are important for international trade. If we don't have an international law that relates to how we trade, then that whole edifice is in danger of falling apart.
And it seems in terms of Australia, it's almost a way for other countries to learn, because we saw these massive tariffs that the Chinese regime levied, over 200% in terms of wine, and yet the Australian economy did not collapse. It seems Australia diversified their supply chains and continued on, and instead China has an energy shortage because a lot of that did come from Australia. So what would you say other countries could learn from this to take forward?
The first thing is not simply to kowtow to the rhetoric coming from China. The wolf warrior diplomacy has been to the fore. None of us should bow down to that. Secondly, and importantly, countries should ensure that they don't have their trade all with one country or a majority of their trade with one country. And what Australia has done in much of its export is to actually diversify that trade so that if things do go wrong with China, we hope they don't, but if they do, then economically we are not dependent upon China in terms of our own prosperity, and I think countries can learn from that. And thirdly, countries need to stand together. The Chinese issued this list of grievances against Australia. They listed a list of grievances against the United States. They're all similar things, but we have to be prepared to stand up to that and say, no, we're not going to bow down to this sort of aggression.
And with all of the different areas covered today, any final words you'd like to share?
Only that it's important that democracies unite. You see that Xi and Putin in this latest visit are trying to join with other autocracies. He has said that, he said to then President-elect Biden that, authoritarian regimes would prevail because democracies were too messy and they took too long to make decisions. But the reality is they have a vibrancy which totalitarian regimes don't have, and we should not be in any way concerned by this assertion that somehow the totalitarian regimes will prevail. Totalitarian regimes have been powerful in the past and they've come down. That's because people in those regimes want the same sorts of things that we do in the West. They want freedom. They want, some degree of prosperity. They want all the things that other human beings want around the world, and yet that's denied them largely in their own countries. So democracies of the world need to stand together to support each other and to withstand the pressures coming from China and from Russia and other totalitarian regimes.
Kevin Andrews, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 2 years. Here's what to look out for in our second half. One more country switching from the US dollar to the Chinese yuan when trading with Beijing. The nation is a major player in South America. What does the shift mean for the US?
I hasten to add that these are all bilateral agreements and they're all trading agreements. That is, the yuan is a long way from an international reserve currency such as the dollar is.
Milton Israti, chief economist at Vested, explains. The full episode is available on our partner platform, AppWalk TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.